Alex, you want to should we do?
Oh, I better probably spit it out myself. Thanks for coming along. If you stayed in the room since Paula's excellent talk on gender diversity, then thanks for sticking around. I'm a woman in technology and proud.
Yay!
I know there's lots of talks to come to, so thanks for taking this one. This is actually a workshop, and we're going to do some work. It's not going to be difficult, it's going to be easy. You won't have to think for long. The work aspect will be like 5 or 10 minutes. And these are our sponsors. I don't know if we've mentioned them enough today. So here are the sponsors of our conference, so thanks to them. So this workshop is called Red or MVP, a practical workshop that's totally real. I'm Alexandra Stokes. I've been working with and around agility for way too many years to mention. The hashtag for this session is TinyMVPs. Feel free to tweet the session or the hashtag, that would be great. And I guess what inspired me to do this talk was after so many years of working in and around agile projects and teams, and despite the fact that we've all, probably read the Lean Startup, and we know about trying to deliver small things, and we've bought into this kind of build, measure, learn mentality, we still tend to do big things, and we seem to not be able to resist it. And the story that's particular to me, I suppose, to this was earlier this year I was working with a team that had been set up specifically to do different things to their organisation. They were told to move with agility, they were provided with coaching, they had very little in terms of constraints, so they were not really constrained in terms of money or what problems they could solve. They were told to find problems for their business and solve them. And to use these approaches that they were being coached in, and to use the approaches of Lean Startup, and they still found themselves a problem that was really too huge, and tried to solve it in a massive way, and essentially created something that was undeliverable by that team. So it really bugged me, because I thought, well, I'm here coaching these people every day, I supposedly know what I'm talking about, and even though I'm saying make it smaller, they still want to make it big. So why is that? And I thought, how can I solve this problem for the world? So this is why we're doing this workshop. So my little theory is that I can stop people from building things so big, help them practically create some smaller MVPs, and really, get that kind of learning into organisations. So I've got a few slides just to talk a little bit of theory. I'm going to try and make it interactive, so I'm going to keep asking questions that I hope you'll answer, and then we'll get into the work bit of it. Okay. So this might look familiar to you if you're working, put up your hands if you're working in agile teams, or you're working in organisations that are doing agile, trying agile, or you understand what a Burnup Chart is, maybe, nods, and if this looks familiar to you. So essentially we have our scope line across the top, and we have our measure of the velocity the team's achieving on this curve down the bottom, and we see that the team starts off, and before you know it, scope is starting to grow. And so what does the team do? They're not quite going to keep up, they're trying to figure out when they're going to deliver. Shit happens, decision has to be made, oh my god, moment we drop a whole bunch of scope, then we keep going, then we find slowly a little bit more, and then we decide, okay, well that's the point where we're going to deliver. So it seems to be rarely in the opposite direction. We don't start off with a bunch of scope and then reduce and deliver. I'm sure it's possible, but it always tends to grow. My experience. Could be yours. Here's another one, and a question. Can we actually control scope? So here, somewhat optimistically, someone has tried to create a graph which has an upper limit and a lower limit to scope. I'm going to guess that no reporting was done between the 10th of February and the 24th of February where scope was a static line. All of a sudden we start creating reports, scope starts moving around again, and once again scope grows. And I think the sad thing about this particular graph as well is there's actually a lower limit on scope. So even if the team did want to deliver something less, they can't, because there's a lower limit. They absolutely must deliver that kind of scope. So does that look familiar to anyone who works in an agile project, this kind of horrible creeping up worm of scope? And I can tell you that it's not even particular to organisations, enterprises doing agile, even startups, this happens as well. So I've got a friend who works in an organisation. On the weekend he likes to code video games. And he's coding a game for his app, and he's doing it with a couple of friends, and we're at a Christmas party showing me his little app, which is like a little sushi man who jumps over obstacles, He goes, oh, I've been doing it for about a year now. Every now and then we have this big kind of hackathon where we try to finish it. And I said, well, it's working pretty good. Why don't you release it? See if anything, see if anyone's going to play with that thing. And he said, well, no, we want to put some wasabi power-ups into it, and we want to see if we can monetize it in some way. And it's kind of like, well, you don't even know that anyone's going to play with this game. Why can't you just put it into production and see if you can get someone playing your game before you start trying to, put all these excellent features into it? But it seems almost irresistible. Question to the audience, why do you think we do these things, these big things? Why are we attracted to doing big things, not small things?
We're not afraid of talking to customers.
Afraid of talking to customers, don't really know what our customers want, so we think imagine we know what we want, so we're going to do something really wow. Yeah?
We don't see a value in small.
You don't see, yeah.
A value in a small delivery sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes you just want to do those big cool things, and it might be cool technology, and it might be I'm with a big multi-million-dollar project. Yeah. Any others anyone can think of?
If you have a vision of a complete project or a product, it's very hard to slice that.
Yeah. So you can see your end goal really clearly. It's this amazing thing. Everyone's going to love it. I don't want to almost chop it into small steps to get there. Yeah. Any others? Say again?
Going about listening to complaints about what's missing.
Yeah, so you listen to maybe the complaints, but also might be the organisational hype that builds up around things that don't work. Sometimes you just buy into those company anecdotes, and sometimes it's real, sometimes it's it's not.
A little bit of competition, only see what's missing in ours.
Yeah, so your competition's ahead of you maybe, and you feel like, I have to play catch up, I have to put in all of those equal features, rather than going, oh, maybe a totally different feature might win my customers instead. Yeah, all good ones. So I've also got a little dollar sign for funding models. Sometimes our funding models are just organised around asking for a big chunk of money, and you can't just get a small chunk of money, so you have to make things a big deal. Sometimes it's our pointy-headed CEOs that have a pet project. And when pointy-headed CEOs have pet projects, we tend to want to make them successful, so we put lots and lots of governance and people and the best people and a lot of effort into them, which makes them big. Sometimes failure isn't culturally acceptable. So in order to remove the idea of failure or the concept of failure, we put a lot of de-risking stuff in, which might be a lot of management, might be a lot of governance or reporting, and those things tend to make stuff bigger and more complex. My personal favourite bottom right is the document made me do it. So sometimes we start with the requirements document, so we feel like it has to be big, it has to contain all that. And there's another one up there, not up there actually, which is, and I'm guilty of this, and I'm sure some of you are too. Sometimes we start agile projects with project inceptions, where we all get in a room and we say to our customers, tell me all the features that you want. We don't say, tell me the one feature that you want, or the first thing that we could do. We ask for everything. We write down a heap of stories, and ta-da, there's our scope. And we know we're only going to discover more after that. So that's kind of why I think we do big things. But what's my personal bugbear about big things? Well, essentially, big things are more risky. So the bigger they get, the more likely you're going to have more platforms involved, the more likely you're going to have more systems interacting with each other. So the potential for error increases. The potential for having different teams working on things increases. So the potential of lost communication and therefore error through that increases. And essentially they just attract more risk for that reason. Sometimes, I don't like big things because they're often not based, no data, that means, that's simple. So it means that you're not making decisions based on real data. You're making decisions based on your kind of theories of what's going to happen, not what's going to happen when you put this big thing into production. You don't really have real data from your customers about how they use your products or services until they're in production and they're using them. Up until then, you're kind of guessing. So I don't like big things for that reason. I don't like big things because they're just too slow. The feedback cycle of 6 months is really hard to stomach these days when there's so many apps and features and coders and great teams out there that can get stuff cranking out into production so quickly. Taking 6 months or 12 months to deliver something just doesn't seem acceptable anymore. And mainly for me, it's about the build, measure, learn cycle that we're trying to get into, and those kind of rhythms that we're trying to get into with really good product development. We can't do that if that cycle is 6 months. And ultimately, what does that not allow us to do if we're not being able to quickly build, measure, learn?
Keep up with the market.
Keep up with the market. What else? What's the essential thing that we've learned about the lean startup? That feedback and adapt or pivot. So The real thing that those short feedback loops give us is the ability to change our mind or keep going. And you can't do that over a 6-month period just building one big thing. So that's why I don't like big things. And I kind of believe that what we've lost along the way in this kind of building up these big things that are very protected from risk and highly governed is we've lost that scientific approach to how we do things. And we've stopped thinking of software as a test or an experiment or a piece of research, and we're thinking of it as a fait accompli that's going to work. And so I think the thing that's missing, or my proposal to you in this workshop, is the thing that's missing is the scientific method and how we work. So the scientific method, quote from my friend Mr. Wikipedia there, is about researching, making observations, and then using empirical measured knowledge to look at the evidence and see what happens. And I think that we've totally kind of gone away from that. And you probably all learnt about it in Year 9 Science, and I think it's very easy to apply to the concept of MVPs. And that's what we're going to do in the workshop today, to help you guys create small, tiny MVPs to test for experiments. So another way of thinking about it is an MVP is not a product in itself, it's a test, and it asks, will a product like this work? So who remembers Year 9 Science, or below? So who remembers what happens when you do an experiment in Year 9? What sort of things do you start with?
Hypothesis.
Hypothesis. Yeah, so we start with a hypothesis, and we work out how we're going to measure our results from our experiment. There's something else that we have, though, that I think is a little bit magical, and it's a bit key to my approach here for you today, which is something called the null hypothesis. Has anyone heard of the null hypothesis? So if the hypothesis is, my hypothesis is we'll do this experiment and we'll see these results and it'll be positive, the null hypothesis is essentially exactly the opposite. So we'll do this experiment, we'll look at the results, and the opposite will be true, or that result will not be positive. And the null hypothesis helps you do something a little bit magical when you think about your MVPs, which is, because an experiment should have as much likelihood as passing as failing. That makes a good experiment. And the null hypothesis allows you to remove the ego out of your idea and stops you being locked in so much to this thing being true and working. And I think this is what helps us break things down. So if your hypothesis is something like, I'm going to run this workshop and it's going to stop so much software from being built in the world, then we'll dig into that a little bit and go, well, how am I going to measure that? Well, it's going to be hard. I have to keep in touch with everyone who's at this workshop, maybe 5 years down the track, find out if they built their software because they came to my workshop, or look at all their organisations and monitor their software. Too hard. So let's break it down a little bit more. Okay, my hypothesis might be something like how that by running this workshop, you'll understand the concepts and be able to apply it to some of your problems, and then I can ask you that at the end. That's how I'm going to measure it, and then I can test that. So that's kind of like a nice small MVP that we can actually test and could be valuable. But the null hypothesis is, I'm going to ask you a question at the end, and you're going to have confusion, and you're not going to have your hands up, and so I'll be able to say, well, that didn't work then. So that's kind of like my null hypothesis. So, I don't know if I'm confused now, but we'll move on. Workshop time. So what we're going to do, it's a bit hard to get into groups, I guess, because I kind of fit it in a classroom, but we're going to try and apply this to real problems. So hopefully you can all think of something that is a real either project in your organisation or a program in your organisation, or one that you've worked on or that you know is coming up. And you're going to take that example, think about identifying a hypothesis and a tiny experiment, how you're going to measure that's going to work, and then also the null hypothesis. And I've got a few tricks, tips and hints that might help you. So using the magic of the null hypothesis, so if you're getting started and you're thinking, oh, I can't do anything but say I need to replace my old system with a new system, I can't break it down any further, the positive hypothesis will be like the new system will get me more customers. So if the negative the null hypothesis is the new system won't find me more customers, well, if that's true, that's really too big a thing to be able to find that result out. Let's try and chop it down and find out a different result, like, fixing this feature in the system might help my customers, that kind of thing. So the magic of the null hypothesis is important. And also ask yourself a question. So we're talking small, tiny, which is what could I deploy to the world in 1 month's time? So I mean in production, in 2 iterations. So it's quite difficult to get something new into production in 1 iteration, I know that. Just technically, you probably can figure a way to do it, but in 2 iterations in a month's time, if you can't define your MVP or your experiment to be in production in a month's time, then I suggest to you that we can break it down further. So those things I'm going to suggest to you have a go at. I'm going to give you about 5 minutes. Anyone who's totally confused, put up your hand, I'll come over. And anyone who can't break their thing down by the end, then we'll try and do it as a group. Anyone confused? Need help? Can I ask you guys to have a go, talk to the person next to you, share what you've learned, and in 5 minutes I'll check back on you.
Like the most dangerous lines, when you find out that I'm pretty safe, and make
sharing, then we'll try and bust through anyone who wasn't able to break their thing down. So I heard a good one over there, the voting app. Do you want to just talk about what your hypothesis was?
Sure. Now that came up with the assumption hypothesis that there's direct information out there on the website, and this company was looking into potentially doing an app for that, and they wanted to find out whether the app would be more successful and more used than the website. So the hypothesis was an app is more popular than the website when it comes to all information. So we started kind of really high level and said, obviously you're going to build the app, and then you're going to show an app site, and then you can find out, but that would take a lot of time. So we kind of drilled down. In the end, we came up with even maybe just a survey where we asked people, all right, you get this information, would you prefer that in an app or on a website? And door A, door B, and then go from there.
Yeah.
And with another hypothesis, the opposite. So another hypothesis would be that the mobile app is not more popular than the website.
And the kind of things, if I were working whiteboard marker, I would write up feasibility, viability, desirability. So those are kind of three things that you kind of want to tick off. Is it feasible? Can we actually do it in 2 weeks? Is it viable? And is it desirable? Will people actually answer that survey? So you can tick off those three things, and it doesn't have to mean it's desirable and the customer wants to go and use it all the time. It's just, is it desirable? Kind of, will it give me the information I need for the experiment? Yeah. Anyone else want to share?
Yep. One of the ideas I've had for a Brain and Hex Kindness project is the concept of an app, which is like travel buddies, where people can check in and say, I'm on this train, travelling this time. Means that people they know they're on the train. Somebody else they know might be on the train, be able to catch up with them. Yeah. Somebody travelling late at night can feel safe knowing there's other people there, can connect with them. So the hypothesis we thought, well, you could actually go to the train, interview people and ask them, do you feel safe travelling at this time? We could even mock up an app based on something else that has geolocation and ask them, would you feel safe using something like this?
Yeah.
With the null hypothesis, some people may actually feel less safe because they may feel that checking on the app might allow them to be targeted or something like that.
Yeah. Cool. I can't even think of a couple of ways you could do that even smaller, like with zero code. Like, could you just repurpose some social network that's out there?
That was one of the thoughts.
Hashtag the 715 Carnegie train, whatever. So great way of thinking. Yeah, just make it tiny. And of course, on hack days, you're looking for the small stuff anyway, right? It's a matter of child's time.
Yep.
Excellent. Let's hear from.
So just a question, sorry. Given these two goals, one idea we had was a survey and another one in this case was also asking people.
Yeah. My question, I've got one too. Go.
With that, sorry, are you really testing it? Because people might just say yes to it.
I know.
In another case, people might just say,
I have a caution on the customer testing as well. Customer testing often, can be inaccurate because when I answer surveys, I say, I'll buy a life insurance policy. It's only when I hand my money over for a life insurance policy am I buying a life insurance policy. So you always have to exercise caution with customer testing. I'm going to come on and talk about how you can implement this in your place if it's difficult. One of the things I talk about is beware of customer testing and prototypes because it's not real. But good ways to get some data and better than my system needs a replacement or we have to build the whole app. But I understand and I agree. You do have to use customer testing with caution and surveys with caution. Can we have another one?
So Katrina had an idea about whether SMSing a customer before their bill was due would increase the rate of payment.
Yes.
And I thought it was a really good idea because you've got a very easy hypothesis, the rate increases,
Yep.
and null hypothesis that doesn't or decreases, and you can measure, you could A/B test
Yep.
number of days or different incentives or
Yep.
other things.
You could segment, you could pick the customers that you're going to target, you could do a smaller segment or a suburb or whatever. Is it feasible? Can you get it done in two iterations?
Yeah.
Is it viable? You'll leave it work? Yeah. And SMS is it work? Rocket science. And is it desirable? Will that give you information that will help you then build out from that?
And I think particularly around the A/B testing, I mean, you can figure out a sweet spot. Does it help if it's 2 days before, 1 day before, or 1 day after?
Yeah.
Maybe it's more viable, it's cheaper if you do it a day after. And what's the outcome of that a week after the bill's due? Is it the same as if you did nothing?
See, I'm hearing like 5 hypotheses there.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we're starting a start.
Anyone else? Or anyone that's got one that they couldn't break down or one in real life that they like, that's nice in workshop and uni, that my real one. Yeah, go ahead.
So this is a real case right now. We're trying to solve this problem. So on our website, we can just buy a product at a time. We don't have an e-commerce solution anymore. So we're trying the best way to do that.
So you can buy one thing at a time. You can't fill a shopping cart.
No.
Okay.
And the products are quite different. Like some are like you buy like a one-off. Some are like recurring payments.
Yeah.
So there are varieties. There's the different variations.
Yeah.
So we don't know how to start.
Yes.
Because if we go for e-commerce solution, it's like
A platform.
everything is a platform.
Yeah. Rather than
So
option.
we're trying to find what would be the MVP for this.
Is it your theory that people want an e-commerce solution?
Well, we get a lot of feedback from customers.
So you've made observations, you've got some theories and everything too.
Yes, and also we have a lot of other, it's a group of organizations, so like US and UK and all, they do have it, and it does work.
Right.
So we do
Does
have
it work to the extent that it increases your revenue so much that they would pay for a new platform? Do you even know?
We don't know.
Okay.
It's a tough one, yeah.
Yeah. The warning is it does hurt your head sometimes to think about it. So you need to find out, is it worthwhile, or you need to do it as cheaply as possible in little steps, or?
Yeah, I mean, we want to do it in little steps rather than just going out and completely changing everything.
Okay.
And
And
it goes fine.
The platform that's single, you can buy single things at a time, that works?
Yeah, we won't be going for a ready platform. We'll probably be building it.
In your website,
Yes,
whatever exists
yes.
at the moment. And you've got people that can change that website?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So you can start mucking around with it and putting things in that were just tiny little experiments. So have you heard about this company called Redbubble? They're in the foyer. And also a little company called Amazon you might have heard of. They have tried this and you could try it, and it's about deploying buttons to their website to see if anyone clicks on it. So
I've actually started work a couple of weeks ago,
yeah,
and about the first week we got rotated through different teams pairing with them.
yeah,
And when we were in the UX team, we actually added a button to one screen to see if people would go from their favourites and add something straight to their cart. And it's actually an invalid test because the favourites are works of art, whereas what you add to cart is an instance of that. But it was a magic door. The button just said, sorry, this isn't available at this moment.
Yeah.
But it allowed us to test would people click on it. The feature didn't even have to be there.
yeah. So you could find a way of putting a button on there that says, do you want to buy more items? Finance people click on it. And you have to kind of use with caution because it can annoy people. But you will find out what kind of items prompt multiple buying of items, and you might just be able to implement multiple buying of a particular item. Because you don't want to, if that's easier than implementing it everywhere, if that's more expensive, you know what I mean? So it's just trying to build those experiments in, and it sounds a bit like, oh, she just said build a fake button in a month, but it's about getting the data back that allows you to make better decisions, yeah? And then hopefully you've got a lot more data so that by the time you do want to plunge in and maybe re-platform the whole thing, you're so used to doing those experiments built on data that it just comes naturally. Like, well, we know those customers in that country never do this. We know customers in this country of that product always do this, so that's what we're going to build first. Does that help?
Yeah, I mean, we were thinking of those lines, and maybe with one product you give a couple more, just set products rather than creating the whole e-commerce solution and see how that goes probably.
Yeah.
Like related products, how you have eBay and Amazon, just try that kind of stuff.
And like, I don't know your company or your volumes or what you're selling or anything, but how's this for a quick and dirty solution? Find people that have bought more than one thing and talk to them, and like even target them individually. So you bought 5 of these last month, are you going to buy 5 again? Because maybe we can do that process manually. And then once you find out that so many customers want to do that, then it's worthwhile building it, and you can take it to the people that have got the money bags to sponsor building it.
I mean, we do have customers who buy multiple, though if I want to add complexity to it, our products, I mean, I'm from a charity, so it's, so you can imagine the kind of
So you're forced to think in a constrained way, which is good, yeah? So you're not building too much crap into your software. Yeah. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay, anyone else who has big stuff to break down? Anyone else want to share one? Or shall I go on to these next slides? Okay. No, I'm going the wrong way. That's wrong. So those are the results. But you might not have all the influence to be able to suddenly design these experiments in your workplace. You might not have, you might not be a manager, you might not have your own teams, you might not have your own funding. So here are ways to get around the rules at your place. Often, if you're funded with big things, they have seed funding that come with them, and generally people spend that money doing investigation or analysis or initiation of projects. How about using that money to start coding instead? If you've got people that can use to start coding and start building real things and start building real tests, and if you don't have coders, you have that little bit of money, but you don't have coders to start doing that, then you could do some of those kind of customer testing type things. You can do some prototyping, you can do prototypes out of paper and pencils and take them to the street and ask people if they would use this functionality. You can ask the people in your team or in your organisation, you can go home and ask your mum. So just to get you in that mode of, I don't want to start this project without any kind of experimental data to tell me what I'm doing next. Form a cross-functional team is excellent because you're more likely to have people with diverse opinions and you're also more likely to have people who have a go at doing some of this prototyping, customer testing stuff. And you might have a UXer in there or a bit of clickable prototype stuff that you can do. And if you're in lots of silos where you're kind of doing analysis phases, build phases, test phases, it's going to be harder to do this stuff because by the time stuff gets to your phase, it's already pre-described how it's going to work. If you do have that kind of siloed working where it's kind of like, well, the developers just get told what to do by the BAs who write the document, then There is a sneaky way you can hire alternative roles. So I've seen this done where people have VAs in their organisation, but they kind of want, we don't want those, we want some agile VAs who can work a bit more agile in the team, so they go hire technical analysts or just calls them something else, but essentially aren't kind of VA on my team, so you've got the opportunity to you can do that. You can try in BAU teams. So BAU teams are often claimed for running in these like kind of small sprints, and they have that notion of these really quick feedback cycles. So you could pick a nice little BAU change and you could apply this kind of hypothesis approach to it, and a null hypothesis, just to get into the practice of using that kind of technique. If you have, if you're forced to work with a vendor, you don't have kind of delivery teams at all, but you're working with a vendor, and you're allowed to kind of do the vendor what you want, you could use the vendor kind of to work in that way and say to the vendor, I want this hypothesis and this null hypothesis proved or disproved. You could find an advocate in the business. So a lot of the time your processes might work in a certain way, but your business actually really wants you to work in this way, and they want to see more results quicker and quicker feedback loops. So you can go and find an advocate in the business to kind of promote working this way with you. Chief prototype and user test, but once again, exactly how you pointed out, use with caution because you do have that confirmation bias. And sometimes you create these great prototypes and say, here's my great prototype with all these features, do you like it? Is it nice? And people go, yes, that's a nice prototype. So, it's not really a real test until you hand over the money for your kind of insurance policy. And then product and business canvases are great tools. You might have seen them around a little bit today. They're really great, quick tools where you don't have to write a big, massive business case in order to start something. You can get it on a product canvas, but why not add in a hypothesis? Why not add in a little section for the null hypothesis? And how you measure it's probably going to be there already. That's a good way of getting it in. I would say also use with caution. I've seen some business and product canvases and vision boards become very, very complicated and very small font sizes. I think that the idea of just having a post-it note in every one of the sections is a really good way to keep those really kind of short and digestible on a page. So those are my ideas for implementing it at your pace. Any feedback is gratefully received. We have a few minutes of questions, but before we go into questions, if you have any, can you just raise your hand if you believe that this approach can help you to create smaller, testable MVPs? Okay, thank you very much. That was my hype. Cool. So over to you, other questions.
So I really love your approach about asking those three questions about feasibility, viability and desirability, because some of the things I've seen companies struggle with is the measurement aspect. So you want to be able to measure the outcome of the thing that you're testing, but you have to measure the baseline in first place. So you might even have to do some work to develop a way of measuring baseline before you can measure your test. But by then asking, is it feasible and is it viable, it wraps up the work you might have to do before you start testing. So thanks for that. It's a fantastic tool for me.
Anyone else have a question?
Do you have some advice on how to work out what to measure? Like I work for a finance company, our clients really interact with them, they put data in our system and they get value out. We think that a change might help them, but how do we go about deciding what are we measuring and what the goal of it? Just an idea of how to start on that.
So do you do any customer testing? Like do you speak to customers that use the data?
Yes, but not in a major way.
Yeah.
We put feedback buttons on the side so they can type in whether they like it or not, but then even that, like you get 100 responses, how do you sift through those responses to work out whether it's achieved?
You know what, there's probably a statistical approach that says you have to go through this data set. In fact, there is. There's statistical relevance, you can look it up. I was going to put it in here, but I couldn't understand. It's too complicated for me. And there is a scientific way to work out what size data you need in terms of sample size. But here's what I kind of believe, another theory, time for another workshop, which is actually if you connect to the people who are working on building this stuff, with the people who are using this stuff, and get real people asking real people questions and leave it face to face, beautiful. The insights and the kind of inspiration you get for the people working together, sort of this idea of co-creation, will probably get you to the result, the desirable result, quicker than all of the surveys and all of the data sets and all of the changes. So that's probably a fluffy answer for ideas would be, how do you get close to your customer and really find out what they want? And you know, for an example is, I worked with the same team that built the too many features into the app and couldn't deliver. They digested heaps and heaps of customer verbatims before we started trying to find the problem. They defined a problem that was too big, couldn't solve it, and in the end, when they scaled it back to a single problem, which was like being able to submit online forms instead of going to a branch to submit them, that little bit of gold was in the original customer verbatims, and it might not have been in there 5 times, but it was in there, and it was a real kind of, like, it was staring them in the face the whole time, and it was deliverable, and it was, you know, gave them, you know, benefits and stuff like that. So I think it's about, speaking to real customers, because if people are going to build this stuff and touch with them, not necessarily building ATMs, just ordinary people who can, you know, use their brains and apply it to the problem, and the goal will be in there. That's another theory for another workshop. We'll get back to you. Tell me
Sure.
Does that help?
Yeah.
I've used Teresa Torres as a 5-part hypothesis as opposed to that, and it has a measurable chance of it. So you have we believe that if we make this change, it will cause an impact of this much to these people. It allows you to really focus in on who you bought it for and how much you're going to change it by, and then that will help you design the data to capture.
That sounds good.
Yeah,
What's
the
her
capturing
name?
the data.
Teresa Torres, T-O-R-R-E-S, and 5-part hypothesis, which is very good. We also use Mixpanel, and which is an event system, which is different to Google events. They're more like a high-level business event. You can code them in points, so when you build your app, you can use Mixpanel to put these events in, and they measure the events, and then that's the way you can say, you know, you can go from baseline of 5 events per month to 50 events per month.
Yeah.
And then it can be about exactly what you do.
Where do you work?
Work at Apex.
Okay.
I just did a talk on
Did you?
on pivoting and using my process and data. We have a part 2 coming up really soon.
Okay, I think we're done, and it's after tea time. If you have any other feedback or any other questions, ping them to me on